There are certain connections that don't need a label to feel undeniable. In the world of BTS, 7 members share a bond built over years of training, performing, and growing up together. And yet somehow, 2 names keep drawing the most attention when fans and industry observers talk about a chemistry that hits differently. Jungkook and Jimin. 2 people who've been side by side since their teenage years, whose small moments, a hand on a shoulder, a look across a stage, a quiet gesture during an interview, have been dissected, replayed, and felt deeply by millions of people worldwide. But here's the question worth asking. What does it look like when music legends, people who've spent entire careers studying human connection and emotion, observe that dynamic? 7 iconic figures from the American music industry have, through interviews, collaborations, or public interactions, offered perspectives that fans have long interpreted as recognizing something distinct about Jungkook and Jimin's bond, compared to how either of them connects with the other BTS members. So who are these 7, and what exactly did they see? Let's start at number 7.
Number 7. Quincy Jones. To understand why Quincy Jones belongs on this list, you first have to understand what Quincy Jones actually is, because music legend barely scratches the surface. Born in Chicago in 1933, Quincy Delight Jones Jr. spent over 70 years reshaping what popular music could be. He arranged for Count Basie. He produced for Frank Sinatra. He crafted Thriller, the best-selling album in recorded history, with Michael Jackson. He won 28 Grammy Awards. He scored films. He built record labels. He mentored artists across continents and generations. By the time most people in the music industry were reaching their peak, Quincy Jones had already done it all, twice. What makes Jones relevant here isn't just his resume, it's his eye. In decades of working with the most talented performers alive, Jones developed something rarer than technical skill: the ability to read human dynamics. He understood that music isn't just sound, it's the relationship between the people making it. The tension, the trust, the unspoken communication between performers. Jones noticed all of it, and he was never shy about saying so. His relationship with K-pop and Korean music isn't a recent footnote either. Jones had been paying attention to the global shift in music for years. In various interviews throughout the 2010s and 2020s, he acknowledged that the epicenter of cultural influence in music was moving, that Korean artists had tapped into something real, something emotional that transcended language. He expressed that the craft coming out of South Korea was disciplined, intentional, and deeply human. That kind of observation, coming from someone who helped define what American pop music looked like for half a century, carries real weight. BTS, by the time they were performing at the Grammys, collaborating with American artists and breaking streaming records across every major platform, were impossible to ignore even for someone of Jones's stature. These were not overnight sensations. They were 7 individuals who had trained relentlessly, refined their artistry across years of albums, and built a relationship with their audience that most Western acts only dream of. Jones, as someone who valued longevity and depth in performance, would have recognized that immediately. Now, within the narrative lens this video operates through, the question becomes, when someone like Quincy Jones turns his attention to BTS, what does he see when Jungkook and Jimin share a stage, a frame, or a moment? Consider what Jones spent his career studying. Chemistry between performers isn't something you can fake at the level Jungkook and Jimin operate. The two have known each other since Jimin arrived at Big Hit Entertainment in 2012, when Jungkook was 15. They grew up together, literally inside the same practice rooms, the same dormitories, the same pressure cooker environment that shapes an idol's entire identity. That kind of shared history doesn't just build friendship, it builds something harder to name, a fluency between 2 people that shows up in the body, in instinct, in the way one moves before the other even signals. Watch them perform. There's a specific quality to how Jungkook and Jimin occupy the same space. It's not choreographed closeness. Choreography is everywhere in K-pop. Every millimeter of stage movement can be scripted. What Jones spent his life detecting was the stuff that lives between the choreography, the spontaneous glance, the instinctive reach, the micro-adjustments two people make around each other when they're completely comfortable in each other's presence. Those are not things you rehearse, those are things you earn over years. Jungkook, the youngest member of BTS, has often spoken about how much Jimin's opinion matters to him, not just as a bandmate, but as someone whose perception of his work carries personal significance. In multiple interviews, Jungkook has described Jimin as someone who notices him in ways that feel specific rather than general. And Jimin, for his part, has consistently gone out of his way to affirm Jungkook publicly, at concerts, in behind-the-scenes content, in small gestures that fans document obsessively because they feel less like performance and more like habit. That distinction matters. Habit means it happens even when no one is directing it. Habit means it's real. From Quincy Jones's perspective, a man who listened to Sinatra explain phrasing, who watched Michael Jackson transform a rehearsal into something transcendent, who understood that the difference between a good performance and an unforgettable one is almost always emotional truth, a connection rooted in that kind of genuine familiarity would stand out immediately. The other BTS members share bonds that are undeniable. The full group's dynamic is one of the most studied and documented in modern pop history. 7 individuals who clearly care about each other and have built something together that none of them could have built alone. But bonds are not all identical in their texture. Some feel like brotherhood, solid, stable, comfortable. Some feel like partnership, strategic, creative, mutually elevating. And some carry something harder to categorize, a warmth that reads to an outside observer as something closer to devotion. Jones's career was built on hearing what others missed. He didn't just hear notes, he heard intention, emotion, and the invisible architecture of human connection underneath the music. In that context, the chemistry between Jungkook and Jimin, consistent across years, visible across formats, and resistant to being fully explained away as mere performance, would be exactly the kind of thing he'd notice. Not because it needs a label, because it's there, and because someone who has spent 70 years reading people for a living would be unlikely to miss it. At number 7, Quincy Jones sets the tone for what this list is really about, the credibility of the observer. And the observers only get more specific from here, starting with number 6, whose entire career was built on something BTS and their fans know well, the art of making an audience feel something they can't quite put into words.
Number 6. Diana Ross. There is a reason Diana Ross is still spoken about in the present tense, not as a relic of a golden era, but as a living standard by which emotional performance is measured. She didn't just sing songs, she made people feel like the song was written specifically about their own lives, their own longing, their own quiet heartbreaks. That ability to collapse the distance between performer and audience through pure emotional transmission is what made her one of the most enduring figures in American music history. Born in Detroit in 1944, Diana Ross grew up in the Brewster Douglas housing projects, a world away from the stages she would eventually command. She joined a vocal group as a teenager, what would become the Supremes, and by the mid-1960s, that group had placed 12 #1 singles on the Billboard Hot 100. 12. In an era when making even one was considered a career achievement, the Supremes were redefining what success in American pop music looked like, driven in no small part by Ross's voice and presence at the center. Her solo career, which launched in 1970, only deepened the catalog. Ain't No Mountain High Enough, Endless Love, Chain Reaction. Songs that weren't just hits, they were emotional experiences that people returned to across decades because they captured something true about human feeling. She received a Presidential Medal of Freedom. She earned a Kennedy Center honor. The Recording Industry Association of America named her the best-selling female artist in history. These are not ceremonial distinctions. They are the result of an artist who spent a lifetime perfecting the craft of making audiences feel seen. And what Diana Ross always understood, perhaps better than almost anyone in her generation, is that the emotional weight of a performance almost never comes from the performer alone.
It comes from relationship, from the space between people, from what two people communicate to each other and to an audience just by being in each other's presence in a specific way. This is the lens through which the narrative angle of this video positions her observation of Jungkook and Jimin. Ross has, across her public life, demonstrated consistent curiosity about the evolution of music and the artists shaping it. She's been vocal about recognizing talent that operates at the intersection of technical discipline and emotional authenticity, qualities that don't always coexist in pop music, but are unmistakable when they do. BTS, as a group that has consistently prioritized emotional sincerity in their music and performance, would have caught her attention for the same reasons they caught the attention of nearly every serious observer of modern popular culture. But the specific dynamic between Jungkook and Jimin carries something that connects directly to what Diana Ross built her entire legacy on: the visible, felt quality of genuine tenderness between two people. Jimin's artistry has always leaned toward the emotional and the vulnerable. His solo work, tracks like Filter, Lie, and Promise, operate in emotional registers that are deliberate and deeply personal. He is not an artist who keeps the audience at arm's length. He invites them in. And in his interactions with Jungkook, that same quality is present: an openness, a softness that doesn't shift into performance mode depending on who's watching. It's consistent, which means it's real. Conversely, Jungkook is a performer whose default register is controlled power, vocally, physically, energetically. He is precise, he is disciplined. He has spoken openly about the pressure he places on himself to meet a standard that most people would consider already unreachable. And yet, in Jimin's presence specifically, that precision relaxes into something less guarded. The moments fans have documented across years of content aren't moments of performance, they're moments of ease, of someone being fully comfortable in another person's company in a way that softens everything around it. Diana Ross, whose entire career was built on reading and projecting emotional truth, would recognize that contrast immediately. She spent decades on stage understanding the difference between a performer who is giving a good show and a performer who is genuinely moved, and extending that ability into how she read the people around her. Two people who move through space together with that specific kind of ease, who soften each other's energy without losing their individual identities, are not performing closeness. They carry it naturally. There's also a generational resonance worth noting here. Ross's era of music was shaped by the Motown philosophy, an obsessive attention to presentation, to detail, to the visual and emotional impression an artist makes on an audience. That philosophy produced performers who were trained to project warmth, relatability, and sincerity even under the harshest spotlight. BTS, whose training under the Korean idol system carries its own version of that same obsessive discipline, share that DNA in a way that a Motown-era artist would recognize and appreciate. What makes Jungkook and Jimin's dynamic notable, particularly from a perspective grounded in emotional performance, is that it doesn't look like training. It looks like the thing training is supposed to produce: genuine human connection that is visible without explanation. The glances, the instinctive physical proximity, the way Jimin's face changes specifically when he looks at Jungkook, and the way Jungkook holds himself differently when Jimin is close. These are not things a choreographer wrote into a script. They are what decades of shared experience produces between two people who have genuinely let each other in. For someone whose life's work was making audiences believe in the emotional truth of what they were watching, someone who understood at a cellular level the difference between performed warmth and the real thing, that quality in Jungkook and Jimin's interaction would be more than noticeable. It would be the kind of thing that makes you stop and pay attention. Diana Ross at number 6. An artist who made tenderness look powerful, and who would immediately recognize when she was looking at two people who do the same thing just for each other.
At number 5, the story shifts to someone who didn't just observe BTS from a distance. He stood in the studio with them, and what he witnessed there takes on a very different kind of significance.
Number 5. Steve Aoki. Most of the figures on this list observed Jungkook and Jimin from the outside, through performances, public appearances, or the kind of cultural visibility that BTS built over years of relentless work. Steve Aoki is different. He didn't watch from the distance. He worked with them. He was in the room, and what you see from inside the room is always more revealing than what you see from the audience. Born in Miami in 1977, Steve Aoki grew up straddling worlds. His father, Hiroaki "Rocky" Aoki, was the founder of Benihana, one of the most recognizable restaurant chains in American history, a Japanese immigrant who built an empire through sheer force of personality and relentless ambition. That origin story shaped Steve in ways that go beyond biography. He understood from an early age what it meant to operate at the intersection of cultures, to build something that didn't fit neatly into existing categories and to make it work anyway. He channeled that understanding into music. In 1996, while still a student at UC Santa Barbara, he founded Dim Mak Records, a label that would go on to launch or develop the careers of artists like The Kills, Block Party, and Deadmau5. Then, he built his own performance career, becoming one of the highest-earning DJs in the world, known for a live show so physically intense, cake-throwing, crowd-surfing, relentless energy that it became its own genre of spectacle. By the mid-2010s, Aoki had over 1 billion streams, multiple Grammy nominations, and a reputation as someone who understood how to make music that connected across demographics, languages, and borders. That last part matters, because when BTS entered the global conversation, Aoki was already fluent in the language of cross-cultural connection. He wasn't encountering them as a curiosity, he was encountering them as peers. The collaboration that brought Aoki into direct contact with BTS was the 2017 remix of Mic Drop. The original track was already a statement, a sharp, confident song about BTS's rise and the critics who underestimated them. Aoki's remix took that energy and rebuilt it into something that translated across every market simultaneously. The result reached number 28 on the Billboard Hot 100, marking BTS's first entry on that chart at a time when the idea of a Korean group breaking into the American mainstream was still considered a long shot by most of the industry. It was not a long shot, it was a precision strike, and Aoki was part of the team that executed it. Working on that collaboration required more than exchanging files remotely. It required Aoki to spend real time understanding who BTS were, not just as a brand, but as individual performers with specific energies, specific strengths, and specific ways of relating to the music and to each other. A producer who has built his career on reading rooms and reading crowds develops an instinct for group dynamics that goes well beyond the technical. When you've spent 20 years figuring out how to make a crowd of thousands move together, you get very good at identifying the invisible threads connecting people. In the context of this video's narrative angle, that expertise is what makes Aoki's position on this list so specific. He wasn't just an admirer, he was an observer who had professional reasons to pay close attention. And what Aoki would have noticed, what anyone watching Jungkook and Jimin navigate their shared professional world closely would notice, is the quality of their spontaneity together. Spontaneity is, paradoxically, one of the hardest things to fake at a high level. You can fake enthusiasm, you can fake warmth, you can train a smile until it looks completely genuine, but spontaneous physical comfort, the instinctive lean, the unrehearsed laugh, the split-second decision to reach across space and touch someone's arm, that is not something that comes from a performance coach. It comes from genuine closeness over years. Jungkook and Jimin have been documented in exactly this kind of spontaneity interaction across hundreds of hours of behind-the-scenes content, live broadcasts, and in-between moments at concerts and promotional events. What makes those moments notable is their consistency. They're not dramatic, they're not designed for the camera, they're the small, habitual expressions of two people who have built a level of comfort with each other that shows up automatically, without thought, in the middle of other things. Aoki, as a live performer, understands the difference between a moment that's staged and a moment that just happens. His entire live show is built on creating the conditions for real moments, for the crowd to do something unexpected, for the energy in a room to take on its own life.
He chases authenticity in performance because he knows that's what audiences actually feel. Rehearsed enthusiasm reads as hollow. Real connection reads as electric. The energy between Jungkook and Jimin read as electric, not because either of them is performing it, but because it's the natural output of a specific kind of long-term emotional investment in another person. Aoki, who has collaborated internationally and worked with dozens of major artists, would have a finely calibrated sense for when what he's seeing is real versus manufactured. And Jungkook and Jimin consistently fall into the category that a trained observer would identify as genuinely unscripted. There's also something worth noting about the specific position of Aoki as someone who operates between cultures. He grew up navigating the space between Japanese heritage and American life. He built a career on music that deliberately refused to stay in one lane. That cross-cultural fluency gives him a particular sensitivity to things that transcend their original context, things that communicate across language, background, and expectation. The chemistry between Jungkook and Jimin is exactly that kind of thing. It doesn't need translation. It lands the same way regardless of where you're watching from. Steve Aoki at number 5, someone who didn't just appreciate BTS from the outside, but stepped inside the creative space with them and brought back observations that carry the weight of direct experience. At number 4, we move to an artist who built her entire identity around emotional honesty, someone whose music exists specifically to name the feelings that most people can't quite put into words, and what she sees in Jungkook and Jimin is precisely that.
Number 4. H.E.R. There's a specific kind of artist who doesn't just perform emotion, they dissect it. They pull feelings apart at the seams, examine what's underneath, and then reassemble everything into music that makes listeners feel like they've been understood by a stranger. H.E.R. is that kind of artist. And that precision, the ability to identify the exact texture of a human feeling and translate it into something others can experience, is exactly the skill set that makes her perspective on Jungkook and Jimin's dynamic particularly sharp. Born Gabriela Sarmiento Wilson on June 27, 1997 in Vallejo, California, H.E.R. is the product of two deeply musical heritages. Her father is African-American, rooted in the R&B and soul traditions that shaped American popular music across generations. Her mother is Filipino, a cultural thread that gives H.E.R. a lived connection to Asian identity and the specific experience of navigating between worlds that don't always have language for each other. That dual inheritance isn't incidental to her artistry, it's foundational. It shaped the way she hears music, the way she understands emotion, and the way she reads people. She was performing professionally as a child. At 10 years old, she appeared on The Today Show, already demonstrating a vocal and emotional maturity that had no business existing in someone that young. She was signed to a label as a teenager, released music under her own name before deciding that wasn't the right frame, and re-emerged as H.E.R., a deliberately mysterious identity designed to make the music lead the conversation rather than the image. The strategy worked with surgical precision. Her early EPs, released without a face attached, built an audience on pure emotional resonance before most listeners even knew what she looked like. The awards followed because the work demanded them. She won Grammy Awards for Best R&B Album and Best R&B Performance. She won an Academy Award for Best Original Song for Fight For You from Judas and the Black Messiah in 2021, a song that required her to write music that carried the full moral and emotional weight of a civil rights story without sentimentalizing it. That is not a task you give to someone who only works on the surface level of feeling. That is a task you give to someone who understands how emotion operates in its most serious, most consequential form. Her guitar playing is a core part of her identity, not decorative, but expressive. She uses the instrument the way other artists use vocal runs, to say the specific thing that words alone can't reach. And in performance, she reads the room with the same attention she gives to writing. She is constantly processing the audience, the energy, the invisible dynamics between people sharing a space. That capacity for emotional observation doesn't turn off when the music stops. In the narrative frame this video operates through, H.E.R.'s position on this list is tied to something specific: her ability to recognize emotional depth in human connection that exists beyond what's explicitly stated.
Her music is largely about that space, the feelings that live between what people say and what they actually mean, the love that doesn't declare itself because it doesn't need to, the closeness that communicates through presence rather than words. Jungkook and Jimin's dynamic lives almost entirely in that space. Neither of them has made grand declarations about what the other person means to them in any formal or official sense. What exists instead is a continuous record of small, specific, consistent behavior that accumulates into something much larger than any individual moment. The way Jungkook gravitates towards Jimin during unstructured group time. The way Jimin's attention tracks Jungkook across a stage without appearing to try. The way both of them default to a specific register of ease and warmth in each other's company that is subtly different from how they operate with the rest of the group. H.E.R., whose entire artistic practice is built on hearing what isn't said, would read those signals immediately. Her songs are essentially case studies in emotional subtext, music about the moment just before a feeling is named, about the weight of things that are felt but not spoken. Best part, her collaboration with Daniel Caesar, is a perfect example, a song that captures the specific quality of looking at someone and realizing they have become, quietly and without announcement, essential to you. That feeling, unhurried, certain, and visible in the smallest gestures, is precisely what fans and observers have consistently identified in Jungkook and Jimin's interactions. There's also H.E.R.'s Filipino heritage to consider. She has spoken in interviews about the way her Asian identity influences her emotional landscape, the cultural values around loyalty, care expressed through action rather than words, and the particular kind of devotion that doesn't need to be loud to be absolute. Korean culture carries some of those same currents. The way BTS members express care for each other is often quiet, practical, and deeply consistent, not performed for effect, but simply present because it's genuine. For H.E.R., that emotional grammar would feel legible in a way that it might not for someone without that cultural context. What she would see in Jungkook and Jimin is a relationship that communicates primarily through action and presence, through showing up, through small adjustments, through the kind of sustained attention that is itself a form of affection. Jimin, who has consistently sought out opportunities to affirm Jungkook's growth and celebrate his achievements publicly. Jungkook, who has spoken about how much Jimin's perception of his work matters to him on a personal level rather than professional. Together, a pattern of mutual investment that is consistent, bidirectional, and impossible to explain away as promotional behavior. H.E.R. writes music about exactly this kind of love, not the loud, declarative kind, but the quiet, habitual kind that reveals itself in the fact that it keeps showing up. She would recognize the shape of it immediately because she has spent her entire career translating it into song. At number 4, H.E.R., an artist whose gift is hearing the specific frequency of genuine feeling. And at number 3, we move to someone who has spent decades studying another dimension of what Jungkook and Jimin share, the chemistry that doesn't just exist between two people offstage, but ignites every time the lights go up.
Number 3, Usher. If you want to understand what genuine stage chemistry looks like, there are perhaps 5 people alive who can explain it with the authority that comes from actually having it. Usher Raymond is one of them, not as a theorist, not as a critic, but as a performer who has spent over 3 decades making audiences feel, in real time, the full force of human emotion delivered through movement, voice, and presence. What he knows about chemistry on a stage is not something he learned from a textbook. It is something he built, refined, and mastered performance by performance across a career that reshaped what R&B could be. Born in Dallas in 1978 and raised between Chattanooga and Atlanta, Usher entered the music industry as a teenager and never slowed down. His debut album arrived when he was 15. His second album, My Way, established him as a genuine force. And then Confessions, released in 2004, did something that most artists spend entire careers hoping to achieve. It became the defining album of its era. Over 12 million copies sold in the United States alone. Yeah, and Burn and Confessions Part 2 weren't just hits. They were the soundtrack to a specific moment in American cultural life, inescapable and immediate in a way that only happens when music is operating at the intersection of technical precision and raw emotional truth. Over 8 Grammy Awards, more than 80 million records sold globally. a Super Bowl 58 halftime show in February 2024 that critics and viewers widely called one of the most technically accomplished and emotionally complete halftime performances in the event's history. That performance alone, the way Usher managed energy across a runtime of roughly 14 minutes, the way he coordinated his own movement with a rotating cast of collaborators, the way the entire production felt controlled and spontaneous simultaneously, was a masterclass in exactly the kind of stage intelligence this list is about. Because what Usher brought to that Super Bowl stage, and what he has brought to every stage across 30 years, is something specific: the ability to make the audience feel like they are watching something intimate happen in public. His performances don't feel like spectacle for its own sake. They feel like access, like you're being allowed to witness something real. That quality is extraordinarily rare and extraordinarily difficult to manufacture. It requires a performer to be genuinely present in their own body, genuinely connected to the music, and, when performing with others, genuinely in sync with the person sharing the stage. That last requirement is where Jungkook and Jimin enter the frame with full force. Usher has spent decades as a student and teacher of performance. He mentored Justin Bieber at a critical stage of Bieber's development, recognizing early what the young artist had and working to help him channel it. He has consistently demonstrated the ability to identify talent and chemistry in others, not just technical skill, but the harder-to-define quality of authenticity that separates performers who are good from performers who are unforgettable. In the narrative angle this video operates through, Usher's observations about Jungkook and Jimin carry the weight of someone who has been in the business of creating and reading performance chemistry long enough to know exactly what he's looking at. Jungkook is, by virtually every measure, one of the most complete performers of his generation. His vocal range and control are documented and extensively discussed. His dancing, which he did not initially train in before joining BTS, reached a level of technical proficiency that earned him recognition within an industry that produces exceptional dancers as a baseline requirement. His stage presence carries a specific quality of controlled intensity. He is always precise, always aware, always in command of the space he occupies. These are not small things. In Usher's world, these are the foundational requirements for being taken seriously as a performer. Jimin, whose entire artistry is rooted in contemporary dance and the emotional expressiveness that comes with that training, operates in a complementary register. Where Jungkook projects controlled power, Jimin projects fluid precision, movement that communicates before the voice does, an ability to make a gesture carry the full weight of a lyric. His solo performances are consistently noted for their emotional intensity, for the way he uses his body as a direct channel for whatever the music is trying to say. Together, on stage, they create something that Usher would identify immediately: complementary chemistry. Not identical energy reinforcing itself, but two distinct performance signatures that enhance each other because they occupy different but compatible spaces. The tension between control and fluidity, between intensity and grace, produces a visual and emotional dynamic that is more compelling than either quality alone. What makes this specifically relevant to the comparison with other BTS member pairings is the quality of attention they hold for each other during a performance. Watch any live stage where Jungkook and Jimin are in proximity. There is a specific kind of awareness they maintain, not performative, not staged, where each seems to track the other's position and energy with a precision that isn't choreographed because it can't be. Choreography can tell you where to stand. It cannot tell you how to be genuinely attuned to the person next to you. That attunement is a product of relationship, of the specific knowledge that comes from having shared a stage with someone hundreds of times and having paid close attention every single time. Usher, who built his career on that kind of attunement, who has demonstrated again and again that he can share a stage with virtually anyone and make it feel like the most natural collaboration in the world, would recognize that quality in Jungkook and Jimin because it mirrors something he has developed within himself. You don't spend 30 years mastering presence without learning to spot it in others. He would also recognize what's underneath it. Stage chemistry at its deepest level is not about technique. Technique is how you get there. What lives at the actual core of it is trust. The certainty that the person next to you knows you well enough to catch you if something goes differently than planned, and that you know them well enough to do the same. That trust, between Jungkook and Jimin, is decades old now. It shows. Usher at number 3. A performer whose entire legacy is built on the kind of presence that Jungkook and Jimin generate together, and who would know exactly what he's seeing. At number 2, we meet someone whose connection to Jungkook specifically is a matter of public record. A musician who didn't just observe from the outside, but stood in direct creative proximity, and came away with something he couldn't stop talking about. Number 2, Charlie Puth. Every name on this list brings a different lens. Some bring the authority of decades. Some bring the credibility of cultural legacy. Some bring the specific intelligence of having worked across genres and borders long enough to recognize what genuine connection looks like regardless of its origin. Charlie Puth brings something different from all of them, something more immediate, more specific, and in some ways more revealing. He brought it from inside Jungkook's creative world, not as an observer, as a collaborator. Born on December 2nd, 1991, in Rumson, New Jersey, Charlie Puth arrived in the music industry through a combination of documented prodigy-level ability and strategic self-development that is worth understanding before anything else. He has perfect pitch, a genuine neurological ability to identify and reproduce any musical note without a reference point, present in fewer than 1 in 10,000 people. He studied at the Berklee College of Music on a full scholarship, developing a formal music theory foundation that most pop artists never bother to acquire because the commercial track doesn't require it. Puth required it of himself. He wanted to understand music at a structural level, not just feel it, but know exactly why it worked. That combination, an innate sensitivity to sound and a rigorous theoretical framework for understanding it, produced a songwriter and producer whose work operates on multiple levels simultaneously. His hits are commercially engineered to reach mass audiences, but they're also constructed with a precision that rewards closer listening. Attention, from 2018, was built on a guitar tone that Puth designed specifically to feel uncomfortable in the best possible way, a tension that the lyric then resolves emotionally. See You Again, his collaboration with Wiz Khalifa for the Furious 7 soundtrack, reached number 1 in 18 countries and became one of the most streamed songs in YouTube history at the time of its release because it captured grief with a directness that cut through everything else that was playing that year. He understands, in other words, not just how to make music that sounds good, but how to make music that makes people feel something specific. And that understanding extends to how he reads the people he works with. His collaboration with Jungkook, Left and Right, released in June 2022, is the most directly relevant fact here, and it deserves full attention. The song came out of a connection that began on social media, where Jungkook had expressed appreciation for Puth's music, and Puth responded. What followed was a creative exchange that moved quickly from casual acknowledgement to a full recorded collaboration. Left and Right entered charts across multiple countries simultaneously, performed strongly in markets spanning Asia, North America, and Europe, and demonstrated something that the music industry had been watching BTS prove for years, that Jungkook's voice and presence translated across formats, genres, and cultural contexts with a naturalness that most artists who attempt cross-market collaboration never achieve. But what Puth took away from working with Jungkook was more than chart data. In various interviews following the collaboration, he spoke about Jungkook's musical instincts, the specificity of his hearing, the precision of his vocal judgment, and the quality of his creative attention. Puth, who processes music at a level of technical granularity that most listeners never access, was clearly struck by encountering someone whose musical sensitivity operated on a comparable frequency. He didn't speak about it in the language of complimenting a collaborator for promotional purposes. He spoke about it with the particular enthusiasm of someone who had genuinely been surprised by what they found. This matters to the narrative angle of this video because of what it establishes. Puth knows Jungkook, not as an abstract cultural phenomenon, not as a chart position or a streaming number. He knows him as a musician, up close, in a creative context, which means he has a baseline understanding of who Jungkook is as a person and a performer that goes beyond public documentation. And someone who knows Jungkook in that specific way would be able to observe, with particular clarity, the difference in how Jungkook operates around different people. The contrast would be visible to Puth in a way it might not be to someone without that direct point of reference. What Jungkook and Jimin share viewed through that lens, is a musical and personal compatibility that is its own kind of language. Jimin's artistry is built on emotional expressiveness, the translation of feeling into movement and sound with a directness that is genuinely rare. Jungkook's artistry, as Puth would know from first-hand creative exposure, is built on precision and instinct, on an ear that hears things most people miss and a voice that can execute at the level of what he hears. These are not competing qualities. They are complementary ones. An artist whose strength is emotional expression and an artist whose strength is precise execution create, together, a dynamic that covers more ground than either could cover alone. The chemistry that fans observe between them, the ease, the warmth, the specific quality of attention they hold for each other, is, from a musical perspective, an extension of that same complementarity. Two people whose strengths fit together, whose working frequencies are compatible, whose instincts about each other have been calibrated over years of shared experience. Puth, who thinks about music in terms of what makes two elements work together, which notes create tension and which create resolution, which voices blend and which clash, would immediately have a framework for understanding why Jungkook and Jimin's dynamic has the quality it does. There's also the human dimension that Puth, for all his technical precision, leads with. His music is fundamentally about emotional honesty, about capturing what it actually feels like to be inside a human experience rather than describing it from a distance. He would recognize emotional honesty in others with the same ease he applies it to his own work. And what Jungkook and Jimin consistently demonstrate, in their interactions across years of public-facing content, is precisely that, not performed closeness, but the real thing, operating in the open because it has nowhere else to go. Charlie Puth at number 2. A musician who knows Jungkook from the inside and would therefore understand, better than almost anyone, exactly what it means when Jungkook's guard is down and he's simply, completely, himself. At number 1, we arrive at the legend whose perspective might be the most significant of all, someone who has shaped the sound of modern music more profoundly than perhaps any other living producer, and who understands the chemistry between two creative people at a level that goes all the way to the bone. Number 1, Pharrell Williams. There is a version of the modern music industry's history that you can write almost entirely through Pharrell Williams. Not because he was everywhere, though he very nearly was, but because the things he touched kept becoming the things everyone else was chasing. The Neptunes, the production duo he formed with Chad Hugo while still in high school in Virginia Beach, were responsible for an estimated 20% of all music played on American radio in 2003. That statistic, which sounds impossible until you start actually listing the records they made that year, is verified. 1 in 5 songs. In an industry with thousands of active artists, Pharrell and his partner were quietly constructing the sound that everyone else was living inside. Born on April 5, 1973, in Virginia Beach, Virginia, Pharrell Williams grew up with a musical intelligence that was evident early and developed with a consistency that never plateaued. He didn't just make hit records. He made records that changed what hit records were supposed to sound like. The Neptunes produced for Jay-Z and Beyoncé. They produced for Snoop Dogg and Britney Spears and Justin Timberlake and Nelly and Gwen Stefani. They produced across genres so seamlessly that the genre lines themselves started to seem less fixed than they had before. Pharrell's ear didn't recognize the boundaries that the industry had erected between R&B and pop and hip-hop and rock. He worked in the space between all of them because that's where the most interesting sounds lived. His solo work extended that reach further. Happy, released in 2013 for the Despicable Me 2 soundtrack, became one of the most commercially successful songs of the decade, topping charts in over 20 countries, winning a Grammy for Best Pop Solo Performance, and doing something rare for a piece of children's film music. It made adults feel something genuine and uncomplicated in a cultural moment that badly needed both. His collaboration with Daft Punk on Get Lucky the same year gave him 2 simultaneous global phenomenons, demonstrating a range that most producers never achieve in an entire career, let alone a single 12-month period. Then in 2023, LVMH appointed him creative director of Louis Vuitton's menswear division, the role previously held by Virgil Abloh, one of the most influential designers of his generation. The appointment wasn't a celebrity partnership. It was a declaration that Pharrell's creative vision operated at a level where the fashion world, the most image-conscious and culturally discriminating industry on the planet, was willing to hand him one of its most prestigious platforms. He accepted and began reshaping the brand with the same intuitive confidence that had defined his music career, by refusing to respect the limits that previous people had established. The thread running through all of it, the production work, the solo music, the fashion direction, is a specific and highly developed ability to read creative chemistry. Pharrell has spent his entire career making decisions about which artists to pair, which sounds to combine, which creative energies amplify each other, and which cancel each other out. That is not a skill you can fake across 30 years and the volume of work he has produced. It is a genuine talent for understanding how human beings relate to each other creatively, emotionally, and energetically, and for making choices based on that understanding that turn out to be correct. In the narrative frame of this video, that expertise places him at number 1 on this list with a specific kind of authority. Because what Pharrell brings is not just the perspective of someone who appreciates great performance, or someone who understands emotional depth in music, or even someone who has collaborated directly with BTS-connected artists. He brings the perspective of someone whose primary professional skill for 3 decades has been identifying the exact quality of what makes two creative people better together than they are apart. And that is precisely the question that Jungkook and Jimin's dynamic raises, and answers, in ways that are impossible to overlook once you're looking. Jungkook's development as an artist follows a trajectory that Pharrell would read with immediate recognition. A performer whose technical foundation is exceptionally strong, who has continued to develop beyond what his training required, and who has grown into someone whose creative instincts are now operating at a level that is genuinely self-directed rather than produced or managed. His solo work following BTS's period of individual military service, his vocal choices, his stage presence, these are the outputs of an artist who has arrived at a mature creative identity. Pharrell, who has always worked best with artists who know what they want even if they can't yet articulate why, would recognize that quality and respect it immediately. Jimin's trajectory runs parallel but distinct. His artistic identity has always been anchored in emotional transparency, in making his interior life visible through his work in a way that is specific rather than generic. His solo album Face, released in 2023, addressed personal struggle and identity with a directness that distinguished it from the broader landscape of K-pop solo output. The album was not designed to be universally comfortable. It was designed to be honest. And honesty at that level, in a commercial music environment, requires both courage and a deep understanding of what you're actually trying to say. Pharrell, who has consistently worked with artists operating at the intersection of commercial viability and genuine artistic risk, would recognize that combination and take it seriously. Together, what Jungkook and Jimin represent is a creative and personal pairing where the individual strengths are distinct enough to create genuine complementarity, where the proximity of their careers and lives has produced not similarity but calibration. They have been in each other's creative orbit long enough that each understands how the other works, what the other needs, and where the other is heading. That kind of understanding between two people produces a specific quality of connection that is visible even when they're not actively performing or creating. It's there in how they exist in shared space, in the ease, in the attention, in the small, consistent evidence of two people who have chosen, across years of circumstance and pressure that would have separated less committed relationships, to remain present for each other. Pharrell Williams, who has built a career on identifying the specific charge that exists between compatible creative people and turning it into something the world can feel, who has done this across 3 decades in 2 industries, would look at Jungkook and Jimin and see exactly what he's been looking for and working with his entire professional life. 2 people whose connection produces something larger than what either of them generates alone. The rarest kind of chemistry. The kind you can't engineer. The kind you can only recognize when you're experienced enough to know what you're looking at. At number 1, Pharrell Williams. The man who built a career on knowing exactly what creative chemistry looks like when it's real. And that brings us to the end of the list, but not quite the end of the conversation. 7 names. 7 different vantage points. 7 people who have, through their own extraordinary careers, developed the ability to recognize something genuine when they see it. What connects all of them, from Quincy Jones's 7 decades of reading human dynamics in music to Pharrell's career-long expertise in creative chemistry, is that they are not casual observers. These are people who have spent their lives in the business of telling the difference between what is performed and what is real. And what they would see in Jungkook and Jimin is what millions of fans have been watching for years, a closeness that is consistent, quiet, and entirely resistant to being explained away. It's worth being clear about something, though, and this matters. The word romantic, in this context, is an interpretation. It describes the quality of their chemistry and the texture of their closeness as it appears in public. It is not a claim about the nature of their relationship, which is theirs to define, and which neither of them has defined for us. What makes Jungkook and Jimin's dynamic so enduring as a subject of conversation is precisely that it doesn't need a label to carry weight. The attention is real. The care is real. The ease between them is real. And sometimes, that's the most compelling story of all, the one that doesn't have to explain itself. If this video resonated with you, let us know in the comments which legend's perspective surprised you most. And if you're not subscribed yet, you know what to do.